The Colosseum, Inauguration Day. 50,000 people packed into stone bleachers, shoulder to shoulder, fanning themselves in the Mediterranean heat, waiting. The emperor himself is watching. Below, in the sand, chains rattle. Guards drag a woman forward. She's naked, terrified. The crowd hasn't even begun to roar yet, but you can feel it building. That hunger, that ancient thirst for something the words entertainment can't quite contain. Then the gates open. A bull charges into the arena. Not to gore her, not to trample her. Something worse. The guards have engineered this moment with the precision of architects. They've built a mechanical replica, a hollow wooden cow crafted so carefully it almost looks alive. They force the woman inside. Her screams start now, but nobody will remember them. The bull mounts the construct. The crowd doesn't hesitate. 50,000 people, senators, children, mothers, merchants, they stand and roar. They're watching an execution disguised as myth. They're watching a woman's final moments repackaged as the legend of Pasiphae, the queen who bedded a bull. The poet Martial was there that day. He wrote it down. We saw Pasiphae united with the bull. The ancient legend received testimony under Caesar. This isn't a movie. This isn't fiction dreamed up for shock value. The Roman poet documented it. It happened. And this was only the first day of 100 consecutive days of games. If you think you know what brutality looks like, you're about to learn that your imagination has been merciful. Because what happened in Roman arenas makes modern entertainment look like a children's show. Rome didn't just kill people for amusement. Rome industrialized it. Rome perfected it. Rome turned suffering into state policy, and then made everyone complicit in cheering it on. If you enjoy these dark stories from history that civilizations tried to bury, leave a like and subscribe. Drop a comment below telling me where you're listening from. I'm genuinely curious to know where these stories reach, because what comes next will reshape how you see one of history's greatest empires. This is the unfiltered truth of Roman entertainment, documented by the people who lived through it, the spectacles historians whisper about but your teachers never explained. 400,000 people, that's not abstract. That's an entire city, wiped from existence across 4 centuries, not in war, not in plague, but in sand and stone for applause. The historian Eutropius sat down and calculated it. Over 250 amphitheatres scattered across Roman territory. The Colosseum alone, 50,000 seats, packed almost daily. Do the mathematics of despair. That's 400,000 corpses. The empire had industrialized death on a scale that wouldn't be matched again until factories learned to murder on their own. But the numbers were never the point. Numbers are abstract. Numbers let us distance ourselves. What matters is understanding the machine underneath. What matters is grasping that this wasn't chaos. This was bureaucracy. This was scheduled. This was budgeted. This was policy. When Emperor Titus threw his inauguration games, he didn't improvise. He brought in architects. He brought in logistics specialists. 100 consecutive days meant 100 days of different spectacles, different deaths, different angles of suffering. 9,000 animals were slaughtered. That's 90 deaths per day for amusement. But it wasn't random slaughter. It was choreography. Think about what that requires. You need supply chains. You need hunters in North Africa capturing lions. You need handlers navigating those beasts across deserts and onto ships. You need a bureaucracy tracking inventory. How many bears left, which lions are too old, which crocodiles are vicious enough. You need animal trainers starving specific creatures to maximize aggression. You need engineers building mechanical devices. You need costume makers crafting elaborate outfits for condemned prisoners. You need administrators creating schedules so that each day's spectacle flows perfectly into the next. You need propaganda ministers understanding that the real goal isn't entertainment, it's control. That's the system. That's what Rome built. The philosopher Seneca attended these games. He went as a spectator, sat in the stands like millions of others, and what he witnessed broke something in him. Later, he wrote something chilling. I come home more greedy, more cruel, more inhuman because I have been among humans. He didn't just watch violence. He watched violence corrupt the spectators. He watched humans train themselves to enjoy suffering. He watched the collective shift into something less than human, and then he went home, and that corruption came with him. Seneca watched the midday executions. This is important. Midday wasn't accident. Midday was strategy. The morning featured beast hunts and combat spectacles. Lunch happened around noon. But before the spectators could eat, Rome scheduled something special. The Damnatio ad Bestias, condemnation to the beasts, criminals, prisoners of war, slaves. People deemed not worth the dignity of a quick death. They were tied to stakes. Wild animals were released. Beasts trained to kill anything that moved. The crowd placed bets. How long would this one scream? Would the lion go for the throat or toy with the prey? Seneca watched humans eating their lunch while watching other humans torn apart. And he understood. This wasn't entertainment. This was training. Every person in those stands learned something during those midday killings. This is what happens when you challenge Rome. But Rome understood that repetition dulls the blade. If you show people the same death over and over, they stop feeling it. They stop learning from it. So Rome had to innovate. Rome had to find new ways to make suffering fresh. New ways to make execution feel surprising. New ways to keep the audience teetering on the edge of horror and fascination. The first answer was exotic. Bring them things they've never seen. Bring them the impossible. When Julius Caesar orchestrated the first giraffe execution in 46 BC, the animal was so alien to Roman consciousness that they didn't have a word for it. They called it a camelopardalis, a camel-leopard hybrid, because their language couldn't process what their eyes were seeing. The giraffe stood in the sand, utterly bewildered, surrounded by screaming faces. Within minutes, it was dead. The crowd didn't mourn the animal, they celebrated the power. Caesar had reached across the world and pulled something impossible into Rome's grasp. He had killed something nobody had ever seen die before. The message was simple. Rome's reach extends everywhere. Rome's dominion includes even the unknown. And then the games escalated. Emperor Titus brought lions from North Africa, leopards from the Caucasus, crocodiles from the Nile, giraffes dragged across deserts. The logistics were nightmarish. Hunters in remote regions tracking animals, caging them, transporting them across thousands of miles through landscapes that wanted them dead. Ships sailed down the Nile loaded with crates. Caravans crossed deserts at brutal pace. Handlers risked everything, delivering live trophies to a city that demanded fresh blood with every sunrise. And when the animals finally arrived, thin, traumatized, driven mad by captivity, Rome killed them in ways designed to maximize suffering. The animals weren't displayed as wonders to be appreciated. They were condemned as prey in a carnival of slaughter. The Romans called these events Venationes, hunts. But they weren't hunts. They were executions of nature itself. Lions were starved before release so they'd attack with frenzy. Bears were chained in pits and goaded into fury. The uncertainty was crucial. Would the beast strike fast or play with its prey? The audience needed suspense. They needed to feel they might witness something extraordinary. A prisoner actually escaping, an animal acting unpredictably. But it never happened. Death was assured. The spectacle was in the performance. The Pliny the Elder complained about it. He watched Rome's obsession with exotic animals and understood what was happening. Rare species were vanishing from their homelands. Lions, leopards, elephants were being hunted toward extinction, not out of necessity, not because Rome needed them, but because the games demanded them. The arena became an ecological wrecking ball, reaching across continents and crushing everything in its path. Rome's hunger for spectacle was literally erasing species from the earth, but animal massacres, no matter how exotic, had limits. The crowd wanted something more unpredictable. They wanted humans fighting humans. They wanted the uncertainty that only came when flesh fought flesh. They wanted theatre disguised as combat. When you picture a gladiator, your imagination draws from Hollywood. Two warriors of equal skill, bound by honour, fighting to determine who deserves survival. That fantasy isn't history. That's propaganda painted over truth. The reality was twisted. The reality was engineered for maximum cruelty. Rome thrived on imbalance. Contests were rigged before they started. Prisoners and criminals were shoved into the arena, dressed as clowns, handed wooden swords, and sent to die against seasoned fighters who'd spent years training for this exact moment. The crowd didn't expect a contest. They expected slaughter dressed up as competition. They jeered as the doomed flailed and fell. They watched wooden swords splinter against real ones, public execution disguised as sport. The weapons themselves were characters in the drama. The retiarius fought with a net and trident, a fisherman's equipment transplanted into a death arena. His opponent, the secutor, he wore a helmet designed to deflect the net. The combat wasn't about skill, it was about suspense. Would the net find purchase or would the sword pierce through? The outcome was predetermined, but the audience didn't know for certain. That uncertainty kept them engaged, kept them betting, kept them invested in watching a man die. Sometimes one gladiator faced multiple opponents. Other times, entire units clashed, 50 men on 50 men, turning the arena into a swamp of blood and mangled corpses. The sand absorbed more liquid than soil should allow. Engineers had to rake it between spectacles to prevent it from becoming impossible. The smell never left. It seeped into the stone. Decades later, people could still smell the blood baked into those amphitheatres. The helmets were weapons of psychological torture. Some narrowed vision so severely that fighters stumbled half blind while the audience roared with laughter. Others were so heavy that simply raising one's head became agony. By the 15th minute of combat, fighters were barely conscious, swaying under the weight, easy targets. Armour wasn't protection, it was punishment. It was cruelty engineered into metal. Gladiators were often dressed as barbarians, forced to mimic Rome's defeated enemies. Their inevitable loss reminded everyone watching. Rome always prevails. Rome's enemies always fall. And if they can fall so easily, what does that say about you if you oppose Rome? The message was broadcast through every combat. The propaganda was embedded in the spectacle itself. Mismatched combat was cruel, but Rome understood it still wasn't the worst thing humans could imagine. Because mismatched combat still assumed the participants understood the danger. They could fight back, even futilely. They could struggle, even knowing struggle was pointless. But what if you removed that? What if you took people who weren't prepared for death and forced them to understand it in the moments before it arrived? That was a different category of victim. That required a different kind of spectacle. By midday, when spectators were eating their lunch, combat gave way to theatre with death as centre stage. The Damnatio ad Bestias wasn't combat. It was execution dressed as entertainment. Criminals, deserters, slaves, prisoners of war. They weren't gladiators. They were unwilling actors in performances written to mortify and humiliate. Each punishment matched the crime. Thieves torn apart by wolves, poetic justice. Arsonists burned alive. The element that destroyed their lives now destroys their bodies. Traitors thrown to lions, the king of beasts consuming those who betrayed the empire. Every scene was a morality play written in real blood, broadcast to 50,000 spectators. Every execution was a sermon. Every death was a lesson. The uncertainty was crucial. Before the gates opened, the victim didn't know which animal awaited. The crowd didn't know if the beast would strike fast or toy with its prey. A lion that hadn't eaten in 2 days would attack with different intensity than a sated lion. A bear that was goaded might charge or might pace. The contingency was real, even if the outcome was assured. That uncertainty kept 50,000 people on the edge of their seats, and nobody was paying attention to how they were being trained. With every execution, their capacity for moral judgment was being eroded. With every death watched while eating, their empathy was being calibrated down. With every roar they added to the crowd, they were becoming complicit in brutality. During Emperor Trajan's celebrations after conquering Dacia, thousands of captives were slaughtered over 123 days. It wasn't random. It wasn't spontaneous cruelty. It was organized like an orchestra, each act flowing into the next with precision.